There is a silence that speaks louder than words, not the silence of absence, but the silence of acceptance. When someone sees that you have moved on, not loudly, not to prove anything, but peacefully, something shifts inside them. This is not about revenge. This is not about showing strength. This is about inner transformation. Today, we explore how a woman feels when she realizes you've truly moved out first. There is confusion, deep, quiet confusion that does show on the surface but stirs constantly inside. Because when a connection ends, certain reactions are expected. Pain is expected. Emotional chaos is expected. Late night messages, unanswered questions, visible sadness, all of that feels familiar, almost predictable. But when none of that appears, the mind struggles to understand what it is witnessing. She looks for signs of loss in you. She expects to see heaviness in your eyes, hesitation in your voice, or restlessness in your actions. Instead, she sees calm, not forced calm, not fake smiles, but a steady sense of balance. And that unsettles her more than anger ever could. Because anger would mean attachment still exists. Peace suggests something far deeper has changed. At first, she tells herself it's temporary, that you're pretending, that the emotions will surface later. She assumes silence means suppression, not healing, because most people don't move on quietly, they break loudly. So when you don't, it creates a disconnect between what she believes and what she sees. That confusion slowly turns inward. She begins replaying moments, conversations, small decisions that once felt insignificant. She wonders when the shift happened. Was it something she said, something she ignored? Or was it the accumulation of things she never noticed while she had access to your emotional world? What troubles her most is not that you moved on, but that you did so without trying to prove anything. No explanations, no emotional bargaining, no attempt to be understood. Your silence feels intentional, not passive, and that intention makes her question whether she truly knew you as deeply as she thought. There's also an unspoken discomfort in realizing that someone can let go without bitterness, because bitterness reassures us that we matter deeply enough to leave scars. Peace suggests closure came from within, not from reconciliation or validation. And that realization can sting. Confusion lingers because peace doesn't provide answers. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't demand accountability. It simply exists. And in that space, she is left alone with her thoughts without conflict to distract her from reflection. She may feel a strange sense of displacement, as if the emotional ground shifted without warning. The role she once held in your inner world no longer exists, and there was no dramatic ending to mark its closure, just a quiet exit, and quiet exits echo the longest. Over time, confusion softened to understanding, but initially it feels unsettling, even haunting, because peace cannot be argued with. It doesn't defend itself, it doesn't explain. It simply stands as proof that something ended not out of weakness, but out of growth. And that realization begins with confusion, the kind that changes perspective forever. There comes a moment when she realizes something has shifted, and it doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly. But once it settles, it cannot be ignored. She notices that the emotional strings she once held no longer respond. The reactions she expected don't come. The messages that once carried weight now feel unnecessary. And in that realization, a subtle discomfort begins to grow. At first, she may test the distance, not intentionally, but instinctively. A memory brought up, a casual reference, a small attempt to reconnect emotionally, not to return, but to confirm whether the bond still has power. Yet nothing changes. You remain composed, unaffected, steady. Not cold, just complete within yourself. And that's when it becomes clear the emotional access is gone. This is not about dominance or winning. It's about the loss of influence. When someone no longer reacts, explains, or seeks reassurance, the dynamic transforms. She understands that her words no longer shape your mood, that her presence no longer anchors your emotional state. And for someone who once held that space, the absence of it feels unsettling. There is a quiet vulnerability in realizing that you can no longer provoke emotion. Anger would have meant attachment. Sadness would have meant longing. Indifference, grounded in peace, signals closure. And closure that wasn't negotiated can feel like rejection, even if it isn't meant to be. She may feel an unexpected sense of powerlessness, not because she wants control, but because she no longer has relevance in the emotional sense. And that absence forces her to confront something difficult. The connection existed because it was nurtured by two people, not sustained by one. As days pass, this realization deepens. She notices that you no longer check in the same way, no longer respond with emotional depth, no longer leave space open for interpretation. Boundaries have replaced availability, and boundaries, when formed through healing, are firm yet silent. What makes this moment heavy is not loss. It's the awareness that emotional closeness cannot be reclaimed once it has been released willingly. There is no argument to win, no explanation to demand, no reaction to analyze. The door didn't slam shut, it closed gently, but completely. And in that calm finality, she understands something essential: emotional connection is not taken away. It is withdrawn when it no longer serves growth. When you move on peacefully, you don't remove someone's power out of anger. You simply return it to yourself. That understanding lingers long after the moment passes, because losing emotional access is not dramatic, it's definitive. And that quiet definitiveness reshapes how she views both you and herself long after the connection has ended. At some point, when the noise settles and the distance becomes real, something unexpected begins to happen within her. It doesn't come immediately, and it isn't dramatic. There are no sudden realizations or emotional breakdowns. Instead, it arrives slowly in quiet moments when distractions fade and silence takes over. This is where self-reflection begins. At first, she resists it. The mind naturally looks outward for explanations, for reasons that place responsibility elsewhere. It's easier to believe that circumstances change, that timing was wrong, that people simply grow apart. But when she sees that you are no longer emotionally entangled, not resentful, not bitter, just steady, the mind loses its usual defenses. There is nothing to react against, nothing to blame. Your calm becomes an unspoken question, not one you ask, but one that exists simply by your presence. And that question lingers: what really happened? Without confrontation or conflict to distract her, she is left alone with her own thoughts. Memories begin to resurface, not as emotional attachments, but as moments to be examined. Conversations replay with new meaning. Pauses that were once overlooked now feel heavier. Words that seemed harmless begin to carry weight. She starts noticing patterns, moments where effort was uneven, where understanding was assumed rather than offered. This reflection is uncomfortable because it doesn't come with immediate relief. It comes with honesty. And honesty requires facing choices, reactions, and behaviors without justification. She may realize that some things were taken for granted, not out of malice, but out of familiarity. Presence was assumed, emotional availability was expected. And when something feels permanent, attention often fades without awareness. There is also a realization that growth can happen silently, that someone can change without announcing it, without demanding recognition. And this challenges the belief that emotional impact must always be loud to be real. Your quiet progress becomes proof that transformation doesn't need permission. As self-reflection deepens, she may feel a mix of emotions, not regret exactly, but awareness. Awareness that relationships are shaped not just by love, but by consistency, effort, and emotional responsibility. And when those elements shift, the outcome follows naturally. She may begin questioning her own patterns beyond this connection. How often does she listen versus assume? How often does she offer space versus expectation? These questions extend beyond you. They reach into her broader emotional world. And that is the true power of reflection. It doesn't isolate itself to one experience. What makes this process meaningful is that it wasn't forced. No accusations pushed her into it. No arguments demanded change. The reflection came because peace creates space, space to think, to feel, to understand. And long after the connection has ended, this silent self-examination remains. Because when someone grows without resentment, they leave behind something more impactful than words. They leave a lesson, and lessons born from quiet realization tend to last the longest. Over time, something subtle but powerful begins to replace the assumptions she once held. It doesn't arrive with emotion or nostalgia, but with clarity. She starts to see you not through the lens of the past, but through the way you carry yourself now. And in that shift, a quiet respect takes shape. At first, she may have believed that moving on would look a certain way, emotional, reactive, or filled with explanations. Many people assume that attachment reveals itself through struggle, but when you chose composure instead of chaos, growth instead of bitterness, that assumption slowly dissolved. What remained was a different understanding of strength. She notices how you no longer engage in unnecessary conversations, how you don't revisit old stories or seek validation. Your boundaries are clear but not cold. There is no hostility in your distance, no bitterness in your silence. And that balance, firm yet calm, commands respect without asking for it. Respect forms because maturity becomes visible, not through words but through restraint. She realizes that it takes emotional intelligence to step back without resentment, to accept an ending without diminishing yourself or the other person, to let go without trying to control how you're remembered. This realization changes how she interprets the past. Moments that once felt ordinary now appear meaningful. She understands that emotional stability is not accidental, it is cultivated, and that the peace you carry didn't come from indifference, but from choosing self-awareness over reaction. There is also a deeper understanding that respect isn't about admiration or longing. It's about acknowledging growth. She may not desire to return. She may not even want connection, but she recognizes that you handled loss with dignity, and dignity leaves an impression that drama never can. What's striking is that this respect grows even in absence, without communication, without reassurance, without closure conversation, because respect is not maintained by proximity. It is sustained by character. She also begins to see the contrast between emotional availability and emotional dependence. You were once available, open, present. Now you are grounded, centered, self-contained, and that evolution speaks volumes. It shows that you didn't lose yourself in attachment, and you didn't lose yourself in separation either. This shift challenges her own understanding of emotional strength. It reframes what it means to move on, not as an act of forgetting, but as an act of honoring yourself. And that realization carries weight. In the end, assumptions fall away. The belief that peace equals detachment fades. She understands that peace often comes from facing pain fully and choosing growth over reaction. And in that understanding, respect settles quietly but firmly. Because when someone walks away with grace, they leave behind something rare, not regret, not resentment, but recognition. Long after the connection has ended and life appears to have moved forward, something unexpected begins to surface. It doesn't arrive all at once, and it doesn't announce itself clearly. Instead, it comes in fragments, quiet moments, fleeting thoughts, memories that return without warning. This is the emotional echo, and it lingers in ways that are difficult to explain. At first, everything distance feels manageable. The separation feels logical. But over time, certain moments start to replay themselves, not with intensity, but with clarity, a shared habit, a familiar tone. A moment of understanding that once felt ordinary. These memories don't demand attention. They simply appear gently but persistently. What makes this echo powerful is its timing. It doesn't come when emotions are raw, decisions are questioned. It arrives later when the noise has faded and peace has settled on both sides. And because it isn't fueled by conflict or longing, it feels deeper, more reflective. She may find herself noticing small things, the way emotional safety once existed without effort, the comfort of being understood without explanation. These realizations don't hurt sharply, they weigh quietly, because they are no longer tied to hope or expectation. They are simply acknowledgements of what once was. There is also an awareness that your absence feels different than expected, not dramatic, not painful in the obvious sense, but steady, permanent, and that permanence is what allows the echo to exist, because the mind understands there is no return, no resolution left to pursue. The emotional echo isn't regret in its pure form, it's recognition. Recognition that certain connections shape us even after they end, that some people leave impressions not through intensity, but through consistency. And those impressions don't fade easily. She may reflect on moments where presence was assumed, where emotional support felt constant enough to overlook. These thoughts don't come with guilt, but with understanding. Understanding often arrives late, after distance has created perspective. What makes the echo linger is the absence of drama. There are no unresolved arguments to focus on, no anger to justify separation. There is only the quiet awareness that something meaningful ended without collapse, and endings like that leave space for reflection. Over time, the echo becomes softer, but it doesn't disappear completely. It becomes part of her emotional memory, not as pain, but as depth, a reminder that peace can still leave a lasting impact, because when someone moves on without bitterness, they don't erase themselves from memory. They remain present in subtle ways, through lessons learned, standards raised, and emotional awareness expanded. And that is the nature of the emotional echo. It doesn't pull you backward. It doesn't demand action. It simply exists, quietly reminding her that some connections don't end loudly, but they stay with you far longer than expected. With time, clarity arrives, not suddenly, but with a quiet certainty that settles in once emotions have fully cooled. The distance is no longer confusing. The silence is no longer questioned. Everything begins to make sense, but by the time it does, the moment to act has already passed. Understanding comes late, and that is what gives it weight. She begins to see the entire journey differently, not through isolated moments, but as a pattern. The patience that was once constant, the effort that was once subtle, the emotional availability that required no announcement. These things were present, but familiarity made them invisible. And now, in absence, they are easier to recognize. This understanding doesn't arrive as regret in the dramatic sense. It arrives as awareness. Awareness that peace doesn't come from detachment, but from acceptance. That moving on peacefully is not about forgetting or replacing. It's about choosing growth over emotional stagnation. She realizes that you didn't walk away impulsively. The calm you carry now is not accidental. It is the result of reflection, healing, and conscious release. And that realization changes how she interprets your silence. It wasn't avoidance, it was closure. There is a moment when she understands that opportunities and emotional connections are time sensitive. That emotional presence, when taken for granted, doesn't wait indefinitely. It responds to effort, awareness, and reciprocity. And when those things fade, so does the connection, quietly but completely. By the time this truth becomes clear, you are no longer standing in the same emotional space. Not because you hardened yourself, but because you evolved. Your boundaries are stronger. Your priorities are clearer. Your sense of self is no longer tied to being understood by someone else. This late understanding carries a particular kind of heaviness, not because something was lost, but because something could have been nurtured differently. And that realization stays, not as pain, but as perspective. She may wish that awareness had arrived earlier, that clarity had come before distance became permanent. But emotional growth rarely follows perfect timing. It often arrives only after experience has done its work. What matters is that understanding, even when late, still has value. It reshapes how she approaches future connections. It refines emotional awareness. It deepens respect for emotional maturity. And even though this understanding arrives after the chapter has closed, it doesn't diminish what was shared. It honors it. Because some lessons aren't meant to reconnect people. They are meant to transform them. By the time she understands fully, you have already moved forward, not emotionally distant, but emotionally grounded. And that is the quiet truth of growth. It doesn't wait to be recognized. It simply continues on with peace and self-respect.